Joining us now on this Saturday is Bill Taylor, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. He's currently a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council. Ambassador, great to have you with us once again. And let's start with this attack and sort of how you see it in the broader sweep of what's been happening in this war over the last few months. I know that you were in Ukraine just a couple of months ago, and so much of what we've heard in recent weeks on this show is that Ukraine has gained the upper hand here, has had an advantage, has been pursuing more targets within Russia itself, in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. What does this latest round of attacks that we saw overnight tell you about the trajectory of this war?
Well, David, this tells us that Putin is willing to fire at civilian targets, increase the number of these ballistic missiles that he fires into Ukraine, into the capital, but not just the capital. My sense is he's desperate to try to get the Ukrainians to quit, to surrender, to stop fighting, and they won't. As you say, I've been there many times over the past 4 years, and they are determined to last it out. They are determined to maintain their independence. So this is just the latest version of what Putin's trying to do.
Ambassador, I do want to ask you, it can't be a coincidence that this larger attack comes right after we heard from the president, him backing away from that pledge to give Ukraine interceptors. We have some sound from the cabinet meeting I'm going to let you listen to.
Now, we have not agreed to that. We're talking about it, but it's a hard thing to give away that kind of technology.
That's basically being asked if they have agreed, which it seemed like that agreement was going forward, to let Ukraine license Patriot missiles. We had Republican Mike McCall on the show who said it was incredibly important, and he was going to fight with the White House, not only the White House, but the defense contractors if they were in the way. Why do you think the president has changed his mind on this, and how consequential is that to the conflict at this point?
Well, the consequences for the conflict, Christina, at this point are frankly very small. That is, even if these licenses were granted, as President Trump said they were going to be in Ankara last month, even if they were granted today, it would be a long time, months, maybe a year, before the Ukrainians could actually start pumping out these Patriot missiles. So the immediate effect is not great. What should happen, what needs to happen, is other nations, as well as the United States, we should provide the Ukrainians with the missiles that exist right now. They are being bombarded, as you've just reported, every night with these long-range ballistic missiles from Russia. And the only thing that can stop them right now are these Patriot missiles. And there are Patriot missiles that are available. Yes, the stocks have been drawn down by the war in Iran, but there are missiles in inventories that could be used. And the Ukrainians are not waiting. Ukrainians are not waiting for these licenses that may or may not come, as the president has said. He may be backing off of that. The Ukrainians are making their own, developing their own version of Patriots.
Just going to cite something else that's happened here over the last few hours. So we had those comments from President Trump, and then there was a post on X from President Zelensky about a conversation that he had with Vice President Vance by telephone, called it a good phone call. Quote, "We followed up on our recent meetings with President Trump in Washington, which was positive and productive, as Russia's air attacks on our country continue unabated. Air defense, specifically Patriot interceptors against ballistic missiles, remains a top priority." What is your sense of the quality of communication here between Ukraine's president and the Trump administration? We could go back to the NATO summit, which there was that meeting between President Zelensky and President Trump, and I think a good deal of happy talk and good feeling about how that went. Do you feel like the president at this point in time, from the comments that he made at that cabinet meeting and elsewhere, is seeing this conflict in a different light than he had before?
I think so, David. I think he is. And I think the reason is President Trump recognizes that, as you've just reported, Ukraine is actually on the front foot. They have the initiative. They are pushing back on the Russians, firing deep into Russia with these long-range missiles that they make themselves, the long-range cruise missiles that they make themselves, as well as killing more Russians on the front line in Ukraine than the Russians can recruit. So the Russians are having difficulty on the battlefield. They can't defend themselves against the Ukrainian missiles, but the Ukrainians are vulnerable to these ballistic missiles, and they need those interceptors. They need the Patriot interceptors now, even while they develop their own.
The attrition rate for Russian soldiers is really startling. We've got President Zelensky was talking about that on Fox News on Tuesday.
So now Putin is losing 30,000 his soldiers per month. I mean, this is big, too much losses, like President Trump says. It's many losses, but he doesn't want to stop this war. So now initiative not in the hands of Putin.
The claim from Ukraine there is that the Russians are losing 20,000 soldiers per month. If this war turns into a war of attrition, logic would think the larger country will last longer, but it's not really an even conflict like that. The other thing that comes to mind is, you know, the USSR played this game in Afghanistan, and it precipitated the fall of the Soviet Union. Is there a risk here to the security of Putin, to the Russian government, if this continues at this rate?
Christina, you're absolutely right. There is that risk. And you're right to point out that the Soviet defeat in Afghanistan led to the fall of the Soviet Union. That has to worry Putin. That has to worry Putin as the pressure builds on him. And President Zelensky's right. The ratio of Russian soldiers to Ukrainian soldiers killed is 8-to-1. 8 Russians for 1 Ukrainian. That's not sustainable. Putin has to realize that he cannot win, that he's losing on the battlefield. His economy is in very bad shape, thanks to sanctions, but also thanks to the Ukrainian attacks. Putin is going to have to end this war soon, or as you just pointed out, he's in trouble like the Soviet Union was.
I want to pull back, if we could. I want to ask you just about the U.S.'s attitude toward Europe more broadly now. And I saw a piece this morning by Paul McCleary of Politico writing about how the Pentagon is giving up leadership of a U.S.-led NATO command in Wiesbaden, Germany. This is the Security Assistance Group, rather. What does that tell you? The statement from the Pentagon that Paul McCleary got is that SAGU is always meant to be temporary. This effort is aimed at burden shifting within the alliance to support Ukraine and to align U.S. resources in accordance with the national defense strategy. Let's linger on that for a moment here. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about the U.S. changing tack, changing position at a moment when it does seem like there is a lot of Europeans, certainly international interest in what's happening here in Ukraine and what it means for the continent more broadly.
David, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. The Europeans are stepping up. Europeans feel the threat of Russia more directly than our Pentagon, apparently. The Europeans are stepping up financially. They provided a $100 billion loan that's going to keep the Ukrainians going for a good 2 years with weapons as well as their government. So the Europeans are also buying weapons from the United States manufacturers and providing them to the Ukrainians. The Europeans and the European members of NATO are really stepping up, and that is having an effect. That is having a real effect. It's too bad for us. That is, we're forfeiting, as you just indicated, we're forfeiting leadership. But you know, the Europeans are stepping up, and the Ukrainians appreciate the Europeans' leadership.
I think the president and this administration would argue that it's well past time for Europe to step up, to contribute more to their own defense. And that's an argument that even President Obama agreed with in his time. He was constantly frustrated with NATO allies. But is there something the U.S. gives up? Does the U.S. lose control, lose influence, and lose the ability to wield that large body of allies by pulling back and allowing Europe to take more control of its own destiny?
Christina, both things are true. That is, the Europeans are stepping up. They are developing their own defenses. They are able to operate and increasingly able to operate on their own. And that's a good thing. That's even a good thing for NATO, for the Europeans to be able to do that. But you're exactly right. The United States, we need allies. We see this in every conflict. We need allies. We need allies to deter the Russians. We needed allies to deter the Soviet Union. We need allies in every conflict that we've been involved in. And our leadership, the U.S. leadership in NATO, was extremely valuable. We're not losing that totally because we do provide incredible amounts of capability to NATO, but the Europeans are stepping up, and Europeans stepping up is a good thing. It'll make NATO stronger.
Ed, you've mentioned they have been providing more and more defense aid to Ukraine. Before we leave this topic, I did want to get your take on the politics within Ukraine and this cabinet shuffle that we've seen with Zelensky dismissing the defense minister, Fedorov. Very controversial decision, led to street protests, led to the dismissal in the end of essentially the equivalent of their, chief of the armed services. Was this a strategic blunder for Zelensky? Can he recover from this? And do you think he's making the right moves following this?
So it was a mistake by President Zelensky, but the mistake was not a cabinet shuffle. The new prime minister knows a lot about getting ready for the winter. He comes from the oil and gas industry. He knows how to prepare for the winter. The new Prime Minister, Goretzky, can bring a big benefit for Ukraine. On the military side, yes, Fyodorov, the young defense minister, now out of the job. And again, that was probably a mistake on the part of Zelensky. However, he rectified it right away. I mean, as you just said, the Ukrainians came to the streets and protested that. They really protested the leadership of the top general. And President Zelensky listened and replaced the top general with a new, younger general. And so I think on net, Ukraine is probably better off after this cabinet reshuffle, even with the change in the defense ministry.
Bill Taylor, I want to get in a time machine here, go back to 2006. You were working with the quartet, you were working on Gaza and the effort to get Israel to disengage from that region, working with James Wolfenson on that, among others. What are you thinking as you read the latest posts from the president about the deal that he says his board of peace has brokered here, as you see the back and forth continuing here between Israel and the Palestinians about who would do what first and how this could come to pass? Do you read that news from the president as positive? Do you see it as indicating that there's any kind of deal in the offing here? What would it take?
So there, you go back in history. That's a great question. Yes, we did some good work. Jim Wolfenson, may he rest in peace, did some very, very good work on getting the Israelis and the Palestinians to agree on the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. And that was a success. It was very controversial, but they agreed, the Israelis agreed to withdraw from Gaza, and Jim Wolfenson and his team helped on that. That's what's necessary today, that kind of working with the Israelis and the Palestinians to come up with a formula which it probably includes a state for Palestine in order to get to a place where there's going to be peace in that region.
Ambassador, given where Netanyahu is in the election cycle, given the viability of a Palestinian state at this time, I mean, people aren't even speaking like it's an option anymore. Is that a realistic goal at this point? And if not, what is the alternative?
Christina, that's the problem. That's the problem. There is no alternative that anyone has come up with. There needs to be two states. Israel and Palestine. There need to be probably different leadership in both, and that's possible because the current leadership in both is not able to come up with this. But that's the end goal. That has to be the end point. There's not an alternative.